Good morning. I'm Kori Schake, Director of the Military Veterans and Society Program at CNAS. Thank you for joining us for today's virtual panel. We encourage you to participate in a few ways as the panel goes on. First, we'll be asking a series of audience questions raised in the poll below. Second, we encourage you to submit questions as we go through the question box. And lastly, you can join our larger conversation by joining us on Twitter through the hashtag CNAS2021. The Military Veterans and Society Program at CNAS provides research intended to strengthen the all-volunteer force, support the veteran and military family community, and inform the civil-military dialogue. Our military personnel research focuses on how DoD and the services can recruit, retain, and manage the talent needed to fight and win the nation's future conflicts. There are few things in the Pentagon more consequential than military personnel policy. The military personnel system is a closed promotion system, meaning that the future leadership for each of the services will be selected from the individuals that the services recruit today. Full military career paths range from 20 to nearly 40 years of service for flag and general officers, meaning that the talent pool from which the future Joint Chiefs of Staff will be selected in the year 2058 is being recruited today. While many in the defense community focus on the development of new platforms, weapon systems, or current operations, it's good to remember that it is service members in uniform who are the driving force for executing the nation's national security strategy, testing and acquiring weapon systems and platforms, and ensuring that the nation is successful in current operations. The Department of Defense is at a pivotal moment with respect to the development of strategy and operational concepts. The shift from nearly 2 decades of counterinsurgency to competition with near-peer competitors, namely China and Russia, set requirements for what the DoD and the services will need from service members for the coming decades. Just yesterday, the Secretary of Defense laid out recommendations from the China Task Force with a focus on future military personnel requirements. The development of operational concepts such as the Joint All-Domain Command and Control, the Army's multi-domain operations, and the Marine Corps Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations will further require new skill sets, including cyber and information dominance, while also requiring mastery of long-held military values, including physical prowess, mental clarity, and the ability to operate in ambiguity. Additionally, we're also witnessing a once-in-a-generation occurrence, the creation of an entirely new military service in the Space Force. Additionally, DoD and the services have some challenges to overcome in order to ensure that those who are highly qualified for military service are interested in military service. The services are currently facing issues of racism, sexual assault, and extremism within the ranks. Given that conservative estimates determine only 30% of American youth are qualified for military service, the Department of Defense must continue to ensure that all qualified candidates see military service as a viable option for themselves. The big question we're exploring in this year's panel is how the United States can best approach military recruitment in an era of competition. We'll begin with 3 audience questions, looking at population trends in the US and our near-peer competitors. We'll present the forecast for population trends in the US, China, and Russia in the year 2050, followed by geographic recruitment trends within the US. We'll use the audience polling feature to capture current perceptions about the state of US military recruitment. So we'll start with a first question in a moment, and you will have 1 minute to provide your answers through the polling box below. First question for the audience is, in the year 2050, who will have the largest military recruiting pool, the US, China, or Russia? You'll have a moment here to answer the question, and I'll provide some context as you think it through. When looking at demographic data from our near-peer competitors, a few trends emerge. First, the United States military is unique in that it maintains an all-volunteer force rather than a conscription force. China and Russia both operate under a conscription model. Military service is mandatory for all male Russian citizens who typically serve for one 12-month draft between ages 18 and 27. China also operates their military through obligatory service to the PLA, However, in practice, the PLA is able to meet their current requirements through a volunteer conscription model. In the event that conflict were to occur, however, the PLA would be able to access the entire male population. We'll now take a look at the polling results and see what the audience had to say. So good job, the audience, you answered correctly. The answer to this first question can be seen in the series of the next 3 graphics. If we look at the population of military recruits as being roughly the age group of 17 to 24-year-olds, we see that the United States will have roughly 88 million individuals in that age range in 2050. In the second graphic, we see that Russia will have roughly 14.6 million in that same age group. And lastly, we see that China will have 138 million individuals in that age group in 2050. So the answer to the first question is that China will have the largest population of potential military recruits in 2050. However, it is worth noting that there are societal differences in the ways each country uses the nation's demographics to meet military requirements. The United States, for example, includes more women among their ranks, and it's a demographic that continues to increase over time. The Chinese military, by contrast, has a much smaller representation of women at 4.5% of their overall military. Thus, when we're thinking through future conflicts, it is possible that the Chinese military will only access about half of the population they have available. So now we'll look more specifically at some trends within the US military recruiting pool. Again, you'll have 1 minute to answer the question and answer the audience poll below. So our second question is, where does the largest absolute number of military recruits come from by state? So the options that you have are California, Texas, North Carolina, and New York. And again, as you answer the question, I'll provide some context. When looking at the US military specifically, geographic representation is a key factor in ensuring a diverse set of backgrounds and experiences are represented throughout the ranks. This ensures not only geographic representation, but can also serve as a stand-in for other demographic factors to include political party, education levels, socioeconomic representation, and to a certain extent, race and ethnicity. The United States military spends vast amounts of resources to ensure that our military is representative of overall society. For example, the congressional nomination system for service academy acceptance ensures representation among graduates who commission into the officer corps from all states. In another example, the services spend a lot of resources to ensure representation among both the officer and enlisted corps from traditionally underrepresented areas such as the Northeast. So we'll now take a look at the audience answer and present a map that will provide a fuller story. Let's see how you all did. All right. So here is a little myth busting. The largest number of recruits actually comes from the state of California. There are roughly 18,000 individuals who were recruited in recruiting year 2016, which is the most recent year for which we have data available. California is followed by Texas, Florida, Georgia, and New York. The consistent factor here is that the largest absolute number of recruits come from the states with the largest populations, which is a bit intuitive. In some instances, however, it also reflects military basing presence and a strong history of military service across the southern states, particularly in Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida. Now we'll move on to our final audience question. On a per capita basis, which state do you think contributes the highest proportion of DoD recruits relative to its share of the 18 to 24-year-old market? Your options here are Texas, Alabama, Hawaii, and California. Again, you'll have 1 minute to answer the polling question below while I provide some context. Perhaps a more important distinction than the state with the highest absolute number of military recruits is the per capita representation of military recruits by state. This gives us a better sense of the relationship between the civilian population and its military recruits. Research demonstrates that military recruitment relies heavily on the role of community influencers, which extend beyond military recruiters to parents, teachers, school administrators and counselors, current members of the local Guard and Reserve units, and returning veterans. We also see a strong relationship in military recruitment within military families. Therefore, we expect to see some correlation between states with strong active duty military presence and the per capita rate of future military recruits. So let's see how you all did. And I have a feeling that the answer will be surprising. Okay, so the answer here is actually Hawaii. The ratio of civilians to military recruits has two factors there, and I think that's what's at play with Hawaii. In some ways, it reflects the fact that there are a large number of military installations in Hawaii, which exposes individuals to military service. It's also a factor of a smaller overall civilian population. But beyond this trend, what we see is that the per capita military recruitment trends across the United States reinforce some longstanding trends in military service. An overrepresentation from the South, such as South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, and Texas, and an underrepresentation from Northeastern states like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Vermont. So, given the strategic and long-term importance of building and sustaining the uniformed talent pipeline needed to win the wars of the future, the Department of Defense and the military services must both capitalize on opportunities provided in current policy to recruit, retain, and manage talent. They will also need to confront a series of personnel-related issues affecting military recruitment and retention, such as sexual assault and racism. Our distinguished panelists today are in unique positions to address the topic at hand, and I'm pleased to serve as the panel's moderator. We are joined today by Bishop Garrison, who serves as the Senior Advisor to the Secretary of Defense for Human Capital and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Dr. Kori Schake, who is the Director of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, and author of Warriors and Citizens, American Views of Our Military. And finally, Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Kaye, in the United States Army, serves as the Los Angeles Recruiting Battalion Commander for the 6th Recruiting Brigade. We will start with 20 minutes of moderated questions, and then we'll jump into the audience questions. So if you have questions for the panelists, please enter them in the chat box below. So I'm going to start with Bishop Garrison. First, can you give us a sense, so you're the first senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense for Human Capital and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Can you talk about how this position came to be and how it's tied to the department's operational mission?
Yes, and thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on such an esteemed panel. This came basically into fruition in the sense that the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Lloyd Austin, determined that one of his top priorities from the beginning would be diversity, equity, and inclusion within the ranks. We see that the military is made up approximately of about 43% of people of color today that are serving within uniform. And the broader population, when you talk about the total force, civilians and military, is roughly about 40%. So it's very important for us to ensure that we're creating an inclusive environment for all those who serve and wish to serve the United States. And to your point on a lot of the issues that you discussed early on in your audience questions about the potential pool of people that we're going to have to recruit from in the coming decades, it's incredibly important that we're doing everything we can to build the type of environment that will see multi-generational construct of individuals who want to come into the service, who want to dedicate their lives and their careers to the service of their nation. So making that a priority now ensures that in the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to have the ability to recruit those people into this new inclusive and welcoming culture.
That's great. Um, Dr. Schake, a question for you. The U.S. military has been the most trusted public institution in the country for the past 20 years, and even longer than that. What risks do you see posed to that trust through issues of lack of representation or the existence of issues like sexual assault, racism, or extremism?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We hold our military to a different and higher standard than we hold other institutions. For example, the data on sexual harassment and sexual assaults for the age bands of people who make up the majority of the military, the last time I looked at the figures, they were actually lower for the military than on most university campuses, for example. So I think the first thing to know is that we hold our military to a higher standard than we hold other institutions and other parts of society. And that's part of the reason the public has such admiration and such trust. The second really important constituent element of that trust, and one that I worry is corroding, is the nonpartisan nature of our military. They don't get involved in politics. They don't take political positions. This has been eroding for a long time. Like, it's not a recent phenomenon, although I believe it's accelerating. But from the time former Marine Commandant P.X. Kelly and former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Crowe, endorsed political candidates, two things have begun happening. The public's ability to distinguish between the active duty military and veterans is diminished. And second, the line is moving on public attitudes. Namely, the public is enthusiastic about veterans and even active duty military being engaged in partisan political activity, provided it supports the pre-existing views of their politics. So the public begins to look at the military the way they look at the Supreme Court, which is, I think they're nonpartisan when they agree with me, and I think they're disgracing the uniform or the legacy of the institution if they politically disagree with me. And what I think folks should conclude from that, or could conclude from that, is that the military has done a fabulous job of using its professionalism as a bulwark against politicization. But there is only so much the military can do as an institution to prevent that when we have such a high degree of politicization in American society writ large. Because the integral nature of the connection between our military and our society is what's creating that. But we actually don't want a military that isn't integrally connected to our broader society.
And Lieutenant Colonel Kaye, Bishop and Kori provided kind of a high-level perspective from a strategic and academic level, but you're engaged with military recruitment at the tactical level every day. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in military recruitment in your area or across the U.S. writ large?
Yeah, thank you, Kate. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be on this panel, and I really appreciate the invite. So I took command last summer, and I've been in the seat for almost a year now. So I say that because I've been a COVID commander more or less for my entire duration. And so when we start talking about trends, I think it's very important, because it's a challenge right now to dissect really what's temporary versus what are some more of those sweeping, broader changes. Because we can classify, what we're seeing with COVID as really kind of temporary, but recruiting in this environment is an enormous challenge right now, and a lot of those factors that Dr. Schake laid out have a lot to do with it. Some of those broader sweeping changes, but it's getting sort of wrapped up in the overall COVID environment, and so it's a struggle. And I think not until the COVID cloud fully lifts, are we going to be able to look back and say what was, some of those primary contributors to the struggle? But that being said, objectively, there's a few trends that are noteworthy, and first is the sort of the quantitative drop-off. And again, this is where it gets wrapped into COVID a little bit. Making mission, we call it making mission in recruiting, right? We're given a quota every month and an annual mission. And it's always hard, even in the best of times. It's always hard. But right now, especially for Los Angeles, but for the whole command, we're about 20% less than generally what we're producing on a monthly basis. So that's just in terms of overall quantity. It's hard to find people that are interested right now. And again, a lot of that has to do with COVID and our access and all that. But another prevailing trend is the qualitative drop-off. And of course, that's a little more concerning, especially when we're talking here in Los Angeles. It's hard. My recruiting formation is really good at finding people to potentially join the Army, but they're having quite the challenge finding interested and qualified people to join the Army, right? And so that's a combination of sort of mental aptitude, i.e. people who can pass the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, be it drug use, be it obesity, be it permanently disqualifying medical issues. All of these things are creating a pool of less quality right now. And, if we're just going to go in pure indicators, we track everything, of course, from leads we generate all the way down to the folks that we ship. And there's a place in the middle of the funnel called your test to test pass conversion. And that historically was pretty high for my battalion and for the command, depending on where you were. And that has taken a significant drop. So we're finding people, we're trying to get them to qualify, and they're just not qualified. So that's another concerning trend. And then lastly, I'll just talk about something a little more specific to my market, since we're talking a little bit about diversity and inclusion. So in the Los Angeles basin, so my battalion, its area of operations is Los Angeles County and Ventura County. About 10 million people, about 1 million qualified military applicants, roughly. But my area of operation is about 58% Hispanic, and so we track very closely we call it our P2P, which is our percentage to population, making sure that we're getting the right amount of folks representative of our market. And that took a hit over the last year. And so our percentage there in that particular demographic dropped. And again, when we're dissecting that permanent from the temporary issues, we know that we had a struggle early in the summer with the specialist Guillen case. And then the subsequent release of the Fort Hood report, and all of those things kind of impacted, I think, a little more aggressively the Hispanic community in my particular market, along with the higher rate of COVID transmission in that community. All these factors, again, trying to dissect that permanent from the temporary. But those are some of the prevailing trends that we're seeing. And I'll hand it back to you. Appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you. Back to Bishop. Might you tell us a bit about some of the initiatives that are currently underway in DoD and how you might measure whether they're successful? I think you're on mute.
It'd help if I unmuted myself. I'm sorry. Overall, without going into too much detail, as we continue to get a better understanding and sense of the totality of everything we've had in movement from late last year all the way through today. We have a variety of programs that are aimed at engaging local communities. To the Colonel's point, it's not only about enticing and building that connectivity, it's about showing what opportunities exist within service moving forward. It's our connection with HBCUs has been great, but it's not simply about workforce. So we're looking at opportunities to invest in their own infrastructure as they're building out research and development centers, as they're looking to become FFRDCs. That not only does that help you to build a pipeline of talent for individuals who could come and serve within the department, but it also creates that nexus, that necessary investment in the communities there that shows that the department is not simply looking for some type of an interchangeable relationship. They're looking to build roots and to establish themselves within the everyday lives of individuals. So looking at the potential of FFRDCs, looking at the potential of research and development centers, and then of course there is the more traditional sense of, well, what type of academic programs are in place for us to build pipelines at universities? What types of things are we building out in communities that can still have that tangible connection back to the future workforce that we will need to build out? So we're talking to different components within the department to determine what types of institutions, what types of entities can we look to put out in the communities to address some of these issues. So it's a very large construct when you think about a population of almost 3 million people within the department, and a variety of components to include the military departments in the Fourth Estate, that we're trying to get a grasp of not only what has been done, but moving forward into the future, what can be done. And when you start to continue to look at this and you talk about that future workforce that we mentioned, that's going to be a highly skilled, highly technical workforce to some degree as well. And I think the Colonel was hinting on that a bit as you talk about the backgrounds of individuals that we're looking to continue to recruit in. So what type of key factors, what type of key initiatives do we need to put into place now that take those types of issues into consideration? So that's a little bit of what we're trying to do across the board.
That's great. Dr. Schake, as the demographics of the U.S. change in the coming decades, what should the military take into consideration in order to maintain a strong connection and relationship with the general public?
So I actually think the American military is already great at this. And we're seeing evidence of it actually on this panel, right? The Colonel's description of why there have been challenges of recruiting is actually a very sophisticated analysis. And because the military takes the recruiting challenge so seriously, and they take it so seriously because they want to be able to recruit high quality American soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen. So yes, the demography of the country is changing, and yes, the military already has a lot of really creative ways. One of my personal favorites is allowing immigrants to the country to have accelerated paths to citizenship by military service, because I think immigrants, they come here for a reason, and most are overwhelmingly grateful for the opportunities they get in the United States. And they have a remarkable record of service to the country through the military. And so I love that we reward that with an accelerated path to citizenship. But there are a jillion ways in which we think about this, and I actually think the military doesn't get nearly enough credit. But again, you see that credit reflected in public appreciation for the military. The military does a better job than most other parts of American society at recruiting diversity, about thinking about creative ways to retain diversity. And so it's one of the real success stories of American society, even though there's lots of room for improvement. I think the baseline needs to be an acknowledgement that our military already does this really well.
If I could add one thing quickly, just to hit off Dr. Shake's point, which was an incredibly important one. We also are recruiting not simply diverse individuals, not simply for the sake of having more diverse individuals on board. The military and our military leaders have definitely identified that a lot of the complexity involved in the issues that we're dealing with today and in the future are going to really require innovative thought. And the way you get the most possible innovative thought is through a diversity of lived experience, a diversity of individuals within that room that can speak to a variety of beliefs, culturally, can speak to of tackling issues from a variety of different angles. So to her point, the military has been great about this for so long because we've had to engage in it constantly in order to ensure that we were a step above both our opponents, our competitors, and in times even our allies.
I've got a follow-up COVID question for Lieutenant Colonel Kaye. So how has COVID affected the way that military recruitment is conducted over your experience? Certainly it's affected the outcomes of recruiting.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something we're still, we're still addressing on a day-to-day basis. Over the last year, we've had to do nothing but adapt and adapt quickly. And generally, the military is pretty good at that. It's one of our strong suits. But recruiting is a people business, and it's about rapport building. And so some of the measures we took still haven't completely bridged the gap between the way we used to do it and the way we're kind of being forced to do it now. I think we addressed it as in true military fashion with risk to force and risk to mission, force being our own recruiters. And of course, this is, we had to bring, during the initial onset of it, and I'll just start there, everybody went virtual, being, teleworking, all of our recruiters. And it was very difficult to get the work ethic, I think, that we needed to make the numbers that we needed. And so as safely as we could, in accordance with local authorities, we brought everybody back into the stations, into the brick and mortar stations. And even though we weren't doing necessarily face-to-face recruiting with the community, we needed that sort of direct supervision, because at the end of the day, it's still, non-commissioned officers who are our primary recruiters, and they need some of that guidance, direction, and supervision. As autonomous and as great as they are, we still needed people in the building. So we've been mission essential, going back to maybe a month or two into COVID. And then it's been from there, to address your primary question on the how. Speaking especially from the Los Angeles perspective, we have not had until the last month or so any schools in session whatsoever, and that is historically the most fertile recruiting grounds for recruiting NCOs. We developed very deliberate school recruiting plans, and to not be able to access the schools was the most significant challenge that we had to overcome. And the second most significant challenge would be our inability to generate any interest or awareness. As you laid out beautifully in the beginning, there are areas in the country, surrounded by military installations, active duty, large formations where that awareness is already generated. But in areas, that we're struggling per se, like in Los Angeles, where there is no active duty, installation. Your closest one is the National Training Center, halfway between LA and Vegas. Nobody sees active duty folks. You need to be able to generate events and generate interest and show the community, the Army. And so we weren't able to do either of those things. And a lot of that is kind of wrapped up into what I was talking about in terms of the quantitative drop that we've seen. But in the true how, it's been all about virtual recruiting, i.e. social media. All of our recruiters are active on social media. It's where Generation Z is. We've only been really kind of, we've been working on it for quite some time, but we had to step on the accelerator the second we couldn't do anything face to face. And so, and it's something that's trained at the schoolhouse now. And so social media primarily, virtual job fairs on a variety of different platforms. We experiment with almost all of them, be it Indeed, Brazen, Premier. We're doing one right now. And then we had to get back to the true blue, as painful as it is, call it telephonic prospecting. And it's not what our recruiting NCOs love to do, but they have to pick up the phone and they have to call. And in this era with phone ID and all that, it's not an easy business. And so we are, even though we've made great strides in virtual prospecting, and we've maintained our proficiency in telephonic prospecting. We can't wait to be able to get back into the schools and be able to face-to-face, because at the end of the day, especially when you can't, when you don't have an installation, those recruiters, when they go into the schools and get to demonstrate their passion and demonstrate what the Army did for them, that's how that rapport is really built, and that's what entices people to want to be like them. And without that, it's still gonna be a challenge out there. So back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll shift to a couple of questions for the panel writ large, and I'll be shifting through some of the questions as well from the audience. So first, we've all watched the debates unfold in recent months and even in the last week regarding initiatives that are intended to recruit and retain those Americans who are qualified and interested in military service. And in some corners, that has been criticized as woke policies, or the debate over whether the military can still be seen as a meritocracy, if it ever was. So how might you respond to these critiques, or phrased another way, what operational advantages do we see when the military is truly representative of broader society, particularly in terms of race and gender? So I'll throw that out to the panel.
So maybe I'll start. I think Bishop made a really good point about diversity creating better problem-solving teams. And I think that's one really important response to those like Senator Cruz, who want the military only to be people who could carry a howitzer shell by themselves. That we do actually need a diversity of skills in our military, and we need them for mission essential purposes. The second thing, the thing that everybody needs to be reminded of, is that the military is actually good at recruiting, and they're not trying to recruit Ted Cruz. They're trying to recruit today's 18-year-olds. And so if you think you can do a better job than the military is doing on recruiting, by all means, come aboard and go let Lieutenant Colonel Kaye put you to work on the telephone. Because mostly it's old people complaining that the world's changing around them, and these kids these days, incidentally, in that recruiting commercial, are serving soldiers, right? So I think it's deeply regrettable and actually shameful of comments like that of Senator Cruz, that these are people who have no place in our Army. It's really bad to drag our military into the culture wars that our politics appear consumed with, rather than issues of governance right now. It's a terrible thing to do to our military, and actually I think an unpatriotic thing to do to our military.
I'll take this up as well. To reiterate something that the Secretary of Defense has said on a regular occasion, we want to ensure that we have a welcoming, inclusive environment for anyone who is able-bodied and wishes to serve. No one should be discriminated against for any reason outside of the fact that they physically wouldn't be able to help us complete our mission. If you want to be here and you want to fight and you want to serve, you should absolutely have the opportunity to do so. A part of Dr. Shake's point, we're continuing to see our own society shift. We're continuing to see, as we have in every generation. I don't think we're seeing anything particularly new here as well. And particularly the individuals that we are attempting to recruit into our foundational base of our military are young 17, 18-year-olds. So we're going to do everything we can to ensure that they feel welcome, to ensure that they want to be a part of the world, the greatest military in the history of the world. Why would we not want to do everything we can to ensure that individuals want to be a part of this institution and want to continue to come into our ranks, so that when we do have, God forbid, the next major issue, whether kinetic or otherwise, that faces us, we will have the absolute deepest pool of talent to recruit from, regardless of those individuals' backgrounds, what they look like, what they believe. I personally don't care. I want anyone who wants to fight, who is willing to fight, who is not going to go against the good order and discipline of units or the cohesion that commanders and their senior enlisted leaders need in order to maintain discipline and to move forward with their missions. As long as those individuals are going to be able to live and to work with their fellow service members within those parameters, I don't care what they believe. I don't care what their backgrounds are. They need to just come and help us serve. So the marketing and the efforts that you're seeing today have resonated as we're continuing to hear with this younger generation, regardless to her point of what some of us older ones, I guess I'm pretty old myself now at this point, but what some of us older ones might believe. It's about how we can at least get them introduced to the military and how we can get them interested for the potential of a career, because we want to ensure that anyone who can and comes and has the opportunity to serve.
I don't have a whole lot to add. Those are both brilliant answers. Really, it's about expanding the talent pool, right? And we have 150 different jobs in the United States Army. Infantry is one of them, and those that are propensed for service in combat arms, we don't really have that much of a problem with. We've been targeting, or don't want to use targeting, but marketing and working with those sort of propense folks for a while, but our talent pool was small. And so by doing this, not only do we get to hopefully bridge the relatability gap that we have with Generation Z, but we have to expand the talent pool to create awareness amongst those that would never have given it a thought prior to this approach. So I applaud the campaign for doing something a little more innovative and for doing something to address this relatability gap, because Generation Z just doesn't have the same familial military experience with their parents or brothers or sisters or friends serving, and so we need to reach out to them in different ways beyond the traditional means. Those that are already propense to serve, we're probably going to talk to at some point, and they're going to end up joining one of the services. It's those that are less propense that we need to at least let them think that military service is an option, and that's where that inclusivity and diversity and reaching out to all is so important.
That's great. So one last question before we wrap and hand it off to the next panel. We've addressed a number of issues that result from DoD internal policies, but there are also efforts underway within the administration writ large and the interagency, as well as legislation from Congress, for example, the Equality Act. How do these broader efforts help reinforce or assist the work that's currently underway at DoD?
Bishop, I feel like
I think I can take that. No, sorry. Well, in particular, it just goes to reinforce a lot of the long-standing beliefs of leadership within the department. When we already know that we have long been an institution that looks for equity and equality in everything that we do, and it helps to hear that from the largest, the top ranks of leadership across the board. So when you, and particularly when we talk about things like everything from women in combat and understanding that it provides them for more opportunities moving forward in their own career progression, to lifting the transgender ban, back to our original point of having a more diverse group of individuals to pull into, it further demonstrates, one, from a societal perspective, that we want to engage in some level of change and make ourselves a more inclusive, welcoming environment. And at the same time, we're going to continue to see that resonate as the military continues to be, to some degree, a reflection of society at large. So I think seeing those types of efforts continue to reinforce this. I can tell you one in particular. It goes back to January, executive order from the White House that had a focus on equal opportunity and equity across the board, and it re-envisioned how we think about equal opportunity and about DEI initiatives. It looked to build opportunities to success and not simply look for pure representation in what we do, meaning that it goes back again to some of the earlier points I think all three of us made at this stage, that we need to look for new and innovative ways to build those bridges to service, because a lot of Generation Z and future generations are not seeing the same familial connection that we've seen previously. I am a veteran. My father was a veteran. My grandfather was a veteran. We're not seeing that in the exact same way. So building out connections to the community through equity, not just, hey, let's come recruit you, come and work with us, but hey, we're here in your community to work with you. And as well as you having the opportunity to then, should you choose, come back and serve. I think it makes it much less of a transactional relationship and shows that we really are trying to invest in deep roots into these communities to build exactly what Lieutenant Colonel Kaye, I think, was aiming for there too.
Well, wonderful. Thank you to all of our panelists for participating in this conversation, as well as to our audience members for your participation and your thought-provoking questions. We'll be followed immediately by my colleague Andrea Kendall-Taylor's panel on Russia and assumptions check. Again, we encourage you to continue following along for each of the conference events, and you can participate through the hashtag CNAS 2021 or by visiting conference.cnas.org for more information. Andrea, we look forward to hearing all that your panel has to bring today.
Thanks, Kate. That was an awesome session.